Well, to discuss this, we're joined from the capital, Rabat, by Francois Koundouno. He's a journalist with Morocco World News. In Montreal, Canada, we have Mokhtar Lamani. He's the former ambassador of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the UN and an ambassador to many other places. And with me here in the studio is Tarek Cherkaoui. He's the manager of TRT World's Research Center. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Let me start with the distinguished ambassador on our panel, Mokhtar Lamani. It's interesting, when we've spoken about the Arab Spring over the past few years, when we've spoken about the migrant crisis, it's not often that we talk about Morocco. But now we're seeing things unfold in such a way that in the year 2018, tens of thousands of people are trying to go through Morocco to Europe, and Morocco's stopping them. Is Morocco doing the right thing?
Well, I think the problem is much more complicated. It does not concern only Morocco, it's the whole North Africa and the whole continent, actually. What I can see that the options made, even since the independence of the continent, the options of development were bad. They have nothing to offer. All these people are very young people. And of course, it's not only Sub-Saharan who are trying to cross from Morocco to the north. They are joined by Moroccans. As well, the problem in Algeria is joined by Algerians and in Tunisia. So it's much more complicated. Unfortunately, all the solutions that they are trying to offer now are not really to the level of the challenges to find really a solution. The problem, you have to see the structure themselves. This is what I can say about this specific problem. And I expect things to become much more complicated in the coming years.
So, Ambassador Lamani, what can they do better? What should they be doing rather than trying to save lives if people are drowning and sending them home if they're trying to get to Europe? What else should they be doing?
I don't know. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's the structure of development. I remember when I used to work in Tunisia in the 80s, there was a poll, and they were asking North African, giving them a lot of solutions, young people between 15 and 25. At that time, more than 60%, I just want to have a visa, a passport and visa, and to leave the country. So if people are not convinced, and they are right if they are not convinced because they have no future, they have nothing. I don't think that anyone would like to take the risk in the Mediterranean Sea where we have 50% to go to the other side or 50% to fail or to die. So what is done now, I think it should be a big conference, right, including Europeans as well as Africans at the highest level. Certainly. And to try to find some solution. But what the Europeans were offering recently, just to have some centers for immigrants, to finance them in Morocco or in other countries, it's not the best solution. Right. And those are just very, very small solution, and they are not going to stop.
Yeah, and I want to bring in my other guests, but I just want to follow up very finally on this specific issue. When the Moroccans say, but these are not young Moroccans who are desperate. Some of them are, of course, but these are not young Moroccans. Yes. When you talk about the root causes, if it's somebody from Cameroon, it's not our problem. It's their business. We're just trying to keep our country stable. It's legal, but is it acceptable for the state to have that viewpoint?
Well, you have on the humanitarian side, which is very bad, but at the same time, if you take a group of these immigrants trying to cross the Atlantic, or those who failed in crossing or who succeeded, you will find different nationalities from Sub-Saharan as well as North African. Right. So this is why I said that the problem is much more complex. It's not only Sub-Saharan coming to Morocco trying to cross to the other side. Yes, this is part of it, but it's much more complicated.
Yes. Francois Koundouno, so Morocco says they foiled 54,000 attempts to cross through their country to Europe between January and the end of August. Of course, there have been many more since then, and we look forward to the stats that come through there. Is it a statistic that the country should be proud of, that they foiled this attempt, or should they have let them get to Europe?
Well, I think there is a need here for complexity and nuance. And I will join the ambassador in saying that the problem is much more complex and complicated than it seems. And it looks to me, at least it seems to me that we need here to reframe the question. The question is not whether Morocco should help them get to Europe or whether Morocco should foil their attempts to get there. The question is, how did they get to Morocco? How do they live in Morocco? And what Morocco is doing as a country trying to keep both its relationship with Africa, which is its institutional continent, and its relationship with Europe. Morocco, as, let's say, a rising African power, is facing a dilemma. It just came back to the African Union a year ago, and it's a very strategic ally with the European continent. So what Morocco is trying to do is keep both that strategic alliance with Europe, but also keep an African perspective on immigration. You put the question in a very simplistic way, as if Morocco is, you know, these are migrants trying to get to Europe, let's stop them, let's prevent them from crossing the borders. No, the question is very much more complicated. As a journalist, working in Morocco, I've got the opportunity to speak to some migrants, know the conditions and the life situations they are living in. And it's something of complexity and nuance. And so what Morocco is trying to do now is both at the same time, they are building some camps. There are camps in Rabat, there are camps in Agadir, there are camps in Casablanca. And so they are trying to keep that continental balance in Africa, like Morocco right now is leading African dialogues on migration, and they're also trying to keep the deal they have with Europe.
Right, okay.
Just
so
some months ago.
So Francois, before you go on, right, so let me take what you say. They're trying to play their part in Africa and play their part with their European partners. And Tarek Cherkaoui, we have their European partners giving them tens of millions of dollars now to say, do something, because Europe is at a place where we're not too happy right now with taking migrants. You have the Italians going quite extreme right now, saying, get the hell out, don't come, right? Yes. So again, I go back to the very beginning, and even though Francois might find me asking this question very simplistically, let me ask it in as simple a way as possible to you, Tarek. Can Morocco do better, or is it doing enough right now?
I think it needs two to dance a tango. I think the problem is, yes, Morocco has a share of responsibility, but the EU has also a big share of responsibility, because there are mixed signals coming from the European Union. So on the one hand, you have forces within the European Union like Spain. They have a more tolerant policy vis-à-vis migrants, and you have the hardliners, some countries like Italy and like other forces in Central Europe who are pressuring the EU to take a harder stance. That hard stance actually was reached in the end of June, this June 2018, where everybody come on board with one decision, is to restrict the borders and tighten them more, and also put some more money to Morocco to police the borders, basically. And also the third solution was that they need to put centers in the whole of North Africa, not just Morocco, but the whole of North Africa and Niger. So these are some of the problems. There are mixed signals from the European Union. The Moroccan government and authorities have also their share of responsibility, because they did a very unexplained U-turn in the past 3 months. Before that, they were legalizing Sub-Saharan migrants, and they were opening the doors and following an open door policy. And suddenly, in the past 3 months, they started using very heavy-handed tactics and expelling people, forcibly expelling them.
So let me ask Francois. Francois, has it been heavy-handed? We've had reports from human rights groups. You're there on the ground, and I want to take the opportunity to use your insights on the ground. We had reports from human rights groups that there's been abuse and there's been excessive use of force in trying to evict people and expel them. Is that true?
There have been attempts to evict people from the northern side part of Morocco. Cities like Tangier, where people were trying to cross to Europe. Yes, it's been, at least from the reports from the human rights movements and human rights group, it's been harsh and a crackdown, but the government, at least that's one side. That's what I keep saying, that it's good to hear both sides, both narratives, to have a more nuanced view on what's happening on the ground, because the Moroccan government, and I live that not only as a journalist, but also as a Sub-Saharan living in Morocco. There's been a policy of opening to Africa. I will make this point again. Like 1 year ago, Morocco came back to the African Union, and the king said that Morocco is African, and the future of Morocco belongs with Africa. So you have more African students, and Morocco right now, at least in North Africa, is the only country where people undocumented can live with no problem.
Right.
Now, what is happening on the ground is that the government pressured with people coming from Guinea, from Sub-Saharan Africa. They are trying to keep that safe net between Africa and Europe, because I keep saying it, it's a shared responsibility. It's not only neoliberal globalization that's failing, but we have to look at the political failures of African countries, for example. Where are they living? And we have to look at what Morocco is doing and the forces. So we have African forces, Moroccan forces, and European forces. The question is,
this is interesting.
Is Morocco doing right? But Morocco is doing what it can, but it's asking help from Europe and Africa to do better.
Okay, so you've opened up something interesting here. Mokhtar Lamani, there's a big question about who is a preferential refugee or a migrant now, right? So we have the Balkan route has been stemmed in many ways, predominantly because of the Turkey-EU deal, right? So the international focus is not so much on that. We're back to the Mediterranean. We're looking at Libyans or people going from Libya to Europe, people going from Tunisia to Europe, people going from Morocco to Europe. The international consensus seems to be, if you're a Syrian refugee, yes, there's war in Syria, you take first preference because your country is currently burning, there's war. But if you're a Cameroonian, if you're from Guinea, if you're from Nigeria, there's no war in your country, you're an economic migrant, so you need to wait in line and you need to go back to your country because, I'm sorry, we can only help people whose countries are in a kind of hot war, who qualify as refugees. What do you make of that? Because that's at the heart of all of this now. For the Europeans saying it's not our problem because these are not refugees, they're economic migrants.
Well, this is the reality because of the international law. There are conventions to protect refugees, and what happened in Turkey with the Syrian, I used to represent the UN in Syria as a special envoy there, and I saw very closely this kind of problem, which is totally different because the case of Africa is mainly economic. There are some refugees, of course, because there are wars also in Africa, but mainly economic war. But look, today, even in the United States, they have the midterm elections. And if you follow this and you see the major issue that the current President Trump is using to have the Republican succeed is what they call the caravana, this movement of economic immigrants coming from Latin America to America, how to stop them and how to send 15,000 from the army to stop them. This is a very serious problem. And I can give you even a personal example. As a Moroccan, I left Morocco in 1979 to become international civil servant. And now when I go to see my family or I go through Morocco, there's no single red light if you are driving a car that you don't have 10, 20 young Sub-Saharan African begging there. And when they heard that, in their villages that some are in a better situation, they will continue coming. So this is why it needs really a very important conference at the highest level. Not only can be done through the UN about this kind of problem of immigration, and to be very innovative to the kind of solution to be that. If now, all what is done now, Morocco recently, just at the pressure of Europeans, took a lot of Sub-Saharan from the north to some cities in the south. They will be back. They will be back. It's those are not really good solutions. This is why we need another movement, an international movement from this kind of problem, because it concerns the whole world. People coming from the south trying to reach the north.
So, Tarek Cherkaoui, if you stop the supply, or to try to stop the supply, you have to reform entire societies, essentially. That's the hard work, is that true?
Well, that's true. I mean, it's hard work, but it's necessary. I think Europe has to remediate to the difficulties that it's created in Africa and elsewhere. For example, you were mentioning the war in Syria. I mean, nobody tried to stop the war in the early phases, and they let it consume the whole country, and then we had millions of people leaving the country. I mean, if there was more proactive stances, if Europe actually go to the European Union, go to Africa and try to put projects, economic development over there, nobody would be thinking about joining Europe. So they have to face the consequences of their actions and the colonial times. Okay.
It's been a fascinating discussion. Now, we touched the surface and we opened up some very interesting things here, and we could go on for much longer. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. I have to move on. But gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Tarek Cherkaoui, Mokhtar Lamani, and Francois Koundouno. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.